Hello, everyone. We'll be beginning today's presentation. Our topic today is how to conquer the interview and get the job. This is one of several webinars that Comrise has been running to help job seekers navigate today's often confusing and competitive job market. To introduce myself, my name is Michael Ferrara. I am the recruiting manager at Comrise. I've been in the recruiting industry for 15 years in both corporate HR and staffing agency roles. And some fun facts about me. I like to play Risk, and once I played a game for over 12 hours straight, which wouldn't really advise. And I've also appeared on Turkish television somehow, even though I'm not Turkish and I've never been to that country. So that's me. And to introduce Comrise to you all, I guess before we get started about Comrise, just some general tips. The line will be muted, but if you have any questions, please feel free to write in your questions in the chat. We will be monitoring those questions, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll take some time to answer some of your questions. Thank you. So to introduce Comrise, if you're not familiar with the company, we are a staffing, consulting, and enhanced search technology company. So we were founded in 1984 in Hazlet, New Jersey. We began by working mostly with telecom companies, but we've since grown to work with lots of different industries. We place over 1,500 professionals a year in different roles, and we also do work in Asia, in the mainland China specifically. And we also have a division that develops software and tools that help recruiters source candidates more effectively. So today's agenda, we will be reviewing interviewing, including some general tips for all interviews, all different types of interviews that you can really apply to any situation in which you're going to be talking with someone about getting a job. And then we'll also go into some of the specific challenges that you'll face when doing things like phone interviews or video interviews, and also if you are asked to prepare a video cover letter. We'll spend some time talking about the best tips for doing that. And then, as I said, at the end, we'll open it up to some questions and answers. So the main objective today is for you to learn about the different types of interviews and really the best strategies for getting through those interviews and how to avoid some common pitfalls and challenges that people frequently encounter when they're doing these different types of interviews. So here's a kind of alarming fact, before we get into the main part of it. The average interview length is 40 minutes, but in a survey of 2,000 bosses, 33% of them indicated that they knew within the first 90 seconds if they would hire that person. And then basically the 39 other minutes were spent basically kind of trying to confirm their initial assumption about that person. So this kind of tells you that yes, when you're interviewing, your work history and what you've done and your accomplishments, all of that's important, but there's a lot more to it than that. It's also about your body language and how you express yourself, and your tone and your attitude. All of that factors in, and all of that helps create an impression in managers' minds. It helps them make a decision on whether or not you're someone they want to work with. So we'll start with some kind of general interview tips for all of you, and this really could apply to any kind of interview anywhere. And I'd say, if there's one thing that you could take away from this seminar, it's that preparation is critical for any kind of interview, and that preparation starts with doing research, and specifically, you need to do research on the company where you're interviewing. Pretty much every company has a website, so it's always a good idea to start with the company website. Go there, read what the company does, what their products are, where they're located, and then you also can look at the wider industry that they're a part of. What are some trends that are going on in that industry? Who are their competitors in that industry? What changes are happening in that industry? And if the company is publicly traded, you'll often find analyst articles about the company and how they're doing financially, what they can anticipate for the future. All that stuff really helps if you know what's going on with that particular company. Because when you're on the interview, if you know what's going on in the company, then that kind of helps you come up with important questions that you can ask that make you sound like you know a lot about it, and you can show the manager that you're someone who's well informed and well versed in that industry. It really makes a difference. You also should research the person who you're interviewing with. Most of the time, when you get an interview, you're told the name and title of the person you'll be talking to beforehand. So use that knowledge to look that person up on LinkedIn or other social media and try to, if you can, learn a little bit about that person, where they worked previously, what their job responsibilities are in their current position, where they went to college even, what they majored in. All that stuff helps. It helps you find commonality with that manager, and then you can use that to your advantage when you're actually on the interview. And if you happen to be working with a third-party, recruiter on a job, then definitely rely on that person to help you, because oftentimes he or she will know a lot more about the job or about the manager than what's publicly available or not, or what you can easily find on your own. So if that person doesn't tell you, then definitely don't be afraid to ask them for more information about the company to help you prepare for your interview. Now, you also want to do some homework in terms of interview questions. And there's certain standard questions that are really common for almost any kind of interview. And those are things like, questions here where you're just kind of told to, tell me about yourself, or, questions where you're asked, why are you looking for a new job, or what is your greatest strength, what is your greatest weakness, or what's a major accomplishment that you've had, or what is your management style, or how do you prefer to work on teams or to work independently. These are all very common standard questions that you can be asked in any interview. And because these questions are so common, you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't spend some time before the interview kind of coming up with what your answers to those questions will be. And one thing, when you're doing your research on companies, you want to, your ultimate goal should be to figure out what are the problems that this company's having, or more specifically for this job that you're interviewing for, what are the challenges that led to the creation of this job. For every job that's out there, there's an underlying problem that exists in the company that this job is meant to solve. So maybe that problem is the company needs to grow their business, and you're the person that's going to bring in that new business. Or maybe the problem is, the company needs to, process things faster, and you're, going to come in and reorganize their processes to make that happen. Whatever it is, you should try to figure out before the interview, if possible, what those problems are. So then when you're kind of preparing your answers to these common interview questions, you're thinking of how your answers are going to show this client that you're the one to solve that particular problem. So you want to highlight your experience that reflects that problem, and how you can go about solving that problem and making life easier for the manager and helping that company grow. And another way to do this, obviously, is to look at the job description and make sure you really understand it. You want to read the job description, maybe 4 or 5 times over and over again, and make sure you know what's on there, and you know what the job is about, and what the requirements are, and what the expectations are. And yes, oftentimes the job description is not a perfect description. A lot of times companies use kind of standard templates or other things, so it's not going to be perfect, but it's better than nothing. It's better than going in there blind and not knowing anything at all about the job. So you want to at least know what that job description is. And again, if you're working with a third-party recruiter, definitely use that person to help you learn about the job. Or even if you're working with an HR recruiter, you can ask that person for help before you meet with the actual hiring manager, just to get some more insights on what the job really is. If you understand what the job is, then you can begin to think about how you're going to be the one to fill that need, and how your experience relates to that job. It can help drive the company forward. And then lastly, you also want to know your own self and your own resume in particular. So make sure you read your resume thoroughly before you go into the interview, and make sure you're prepared to speak about every aspect of that resume. Anything you write on the resume is fair game for questions, even if it's something that you did in a job from 10 years ago. If you wrote it on your resume, it's entirely possible that the person who's interviewing you may see that and ask you a question about it. And if you can't back it up with an actual answer, or if you kind of stumble or you're confused, it does not reflect well on you. So you definitely need to know what's on your own resume, and you need to be prepared to speak to everything that you said on your resume. And that's why, and it's a little out of the scope of this presentation, but when you're writing a resume, you want to be honest about what you can do and can't do, so that when you get to the interview, you don't have to lie or exaggerate. You actually can speak to what you wrote on your resume. Now, in addition to the actual job, companies also very frequently will try to look for a cultural fit, and it's a little challenging sometimes to know what a company's culture is. If it's a well-known company like Google or Facebook, you can do a search and find out what the company's culture is like. But if it's a smaller company, you don't always know. So one thing you can do is one, you can look on their website. Some companies will have a cultural section on their website, what that will kind of explain, what their culture is like, and that's not always perfect, but it's a good starting point. Or two, you can look on LinkedIn and see if you know anyone that works at that company, or maybe you know someone who knows someone that works at that company, and by all means, use that network to your advantage and get some insights into what the company's like, or even what the manager's like, what their style is like. Is the company very team focused? Is it more individual based? Is it, do they work around the clock, or is it more of a laid back style? Whatever it is, that information is important, so that when you go on the interview, if you know what the culture's like, you can highlight the aspects of your experience or personality that would show you're a good fit for that culture. And again, you don't want to pretend to be someone that you're not, but no one is a single thing, right? Everyone has multiple aspects to their personality. So if you know what they're looking for, you can use that to highlight the parts of you that would be a good fit for that particular environment. Also, again, we talked about how managers make decisions very quickly, and that really comes into making a good first impression. And how do you make a good first impression? I think number one, you need to pay attention to your appearance. So that includes dressing professionally. In general, it's always good advice to wear a business suit or business attire to an interview, especially if you're not sure of what the environment's like. It's always better to dress more conservatively than you normally would, just to be on the safe side. You generally will not ever not get a job because you dress too well, but you may not get a job if you dress poorly. So it's not worth it to take that risk. You should dress professionally. And the only exception would be if it's a startup, or you know someone that works there and you know for a fact that it's a very casual environment and you might look strange coming in a full suit. If you have that inside information, then maybe you can take the chance and dress more casually. But if you don't know, it's always better to err on the side of caution and to dress more professionally. Make sure your clothes are well-fitting, they're clean, they're neat, and make sure your hair is neat, your nails are clean and manicured. Take a breath mint before you go in there, and also make sure your palms aren't sweaty. You might want to wipe them down with a napkin, or just something to dry your hands before you meet the manager. And you should definitely offer a handshake when you meet the manager, and try to make it firm but not a death grip. You want to kind of, you don't want to have like a limp, weak handshake, but if you kind of strangle that person's hand, then that's not good either. So you want to kind of find a nice balance between the two. And then in that first initial chat, if there's some way that you can either have like kind of like a icebreaker, or find some sort of a commonality, maybe you went to the same school, or there's something that you two have in common, if you can kind of introduce that in a casual and natural way to lighten the mood, that really helps. It kind of gets the interview off to a good start, and it definitely helps make a strong impression. But at the same time, be cautious. It's better to not say anything like that if you than to come up with something ridiculous, or to make an offensive joke, or something that's completely unprofessional or out of line. But if you see the opening to make a connection or find that commonality, by all means go for it, because that really makes a big difference. So some other tips that you should follow. If you're going to an in-person interview, it's really important to be on time, and that's kind of obvious. But what I found when I used to interview people is it's extremely irritating when you're interviewing someone and they show up 30 minutes early, because you're doing other things and you're busy in your work, and then you kind of feel obligated to stop what you're doing and go take that interview early, and it just kind of gets things off on the wrong foot. So don't be too early, and obviously don't be late. Really try to be. The ideal is maybe about 10 minutes early is best. If you're any earlier than that, then go find another place to sit, maybe a coffee shop or in the lobby, before you go in to meet with the manager. And if you're not familiar with where you're interviewing, it's a good idea to do your homework beforehand. Use Google Maps, figure out how long it'll take there. If you have time, even do a dry run to figure out how you'll get there, so you kind of can anticipate how early you need to leave, so that you don't run into any hurdles or get lost on the way there. That's really important. You can even ask the company for help with directions in terms of how to get to your interview. Now, when you're going on the interview, it's important to be polite and respectful to everybody that you meet, not just the manager, but everyone, including people like the receptionist, for example. It's not that uncommon for companies to actually ask the receptionist how that person carried, his or herself when they were going into the interview. I used to hear a story about Zappos. They're based in Las Vegas, and a lot of times they would fly people into interviews, and they actually had a company bus that people would go on to, and they would take them from the airport to their offices. And as part of the hiring process, they would actually ask the bus driver, what the person was like on the bus, how they carried themselves, if they did anything inappropriate. So every step of the process, make sure you're politeful and on your best manners throughout that process. And then in general, on any interview, a key skill you have to have is listening. You need to listen to the manager, and you need to listen to yourself. When you talk to the manager, very often he or she will kind of tell you almost what they want to hear. Like they'll, if you're listening, they may actually tell you what they want in this job, or what they think the ideal candidate would have, or what kind of answers they'd like to see, or they may tell you what the culture is really like here, or what the job is really going to entail. And if you're paying attention and you're listening, you can adapt your answers to kind of match up with what that person's expectations are. That's really important. Listening skills are critical for any job interview. And then you want to listen to yourself. Very often on interviews, people get nervous, and when you're nervous, you tend to ramble sometimes, or you just kind of speak in long, crazy sentences, or you go off on tangents. If you're listening to yourself, you can pay attention to that and try not to do it, or try to avoid doing it. You want to avoid giving too much information, or saying irrelevant things. And if you're ever not sure if you're doing this, it's okay to actually ask the managers, hey, am I giving you enough information, or am I giving you too much, and kind of use that as a clue as to whether you're doing too much, or you're doing just the right amount of information. Now, during the course of the interview, you want to think about how you're carrying yourself and how you're presenting yourself. And one thing to do is to make sure you're making eye contact. And don't go over the top, but in general, when you're answering, look that person right in the eye, and show yourself to be a positive, confident professional who's positive and has a lot of energy. No one wants to hire someone who's going to be miserable or unhappy, and if you're in an interview and you're acting drained or bored, or you're not paying attention, that's a huge red flag. I mean, if you can't be energetic and positive on an interview, what are you going to be like when you're actually on the job? It's a major turnoff to a lot of people. So even if you're having a bad day or having some personal problems, kind of put that behind you and put on a positive, high energy mode when you're doing your interview. And then obviously don't go over the top. Don't want to be jumping off the walls, but you need to have some spark to you when you're talking. Also, you want to be someone that this manager would be working with every day. Because if you think about it, when it's not just can you do the job, but are you somebody who this manager wants to spend 8 hours a day, sitting next to or working with? People kind of like people who sort of remind them of themselves. So you want to take cues from the manager and how he or she is carrying him or herself, and kind of not mimic, but try to, again, bring out the aspects of your personality that are sort of related to how that person's working. So if the person has kind of got a more casual tone, you might want to be a little bit more casual. But the warning to that is sometimes managers will intentionally be casual so that you let your guard down, and you don't want to ever let yourself say something unprofessional or something that's inappropriate. Always be professional. Even if the interview is getting more casual, still put on a professional image, and express yourself, again, in a confident way without being arrogant too. You want to show that you can do the job, but you also have humility, and you know what you don't know, and you're willing to learn new things. You don't want to come in there saying, yeah, you guys are idiots, and I know everything, and I'm going to fix all your problems. That again, is kind of a turnoff sometimes. Now, with any interview, rarely are you going to be a 100% perfect match for the job. So it's always a good idea beforehand to anticipate what do you think the concerns a manager may have will be. So when you look at the job description, you may know that, yeah, maybe you're lacking, you might have skill A, B, C, but you're lacking, skills, D, E, F. So it's likely if you're lacking that may come up on the interview. So you want to think beforehand, how are you going to deal with that? How are you going to show that you, could overcome what you're lacking, or if you've been out of work for a while, that may come up on the interview. How are you going to handle it when the manager asks you, what have you been doing for the last 12 months? So if you know that that's a weakness that you have, be prepared beforehand to address that weakness to the best of your ability. And in the same token, you also want to know your strengths and how to play to those strengths. What is it about you that makes you stand out from other people? Like, what you need to know what your best abilities are, what your best self is, and be prepared to talk about that on the interview and really let that come through and know that this is the area that I really know what I'm doing and I really can bring this to the table with your company. And you need to know your strengths and then highlight that. So you want to highlight your strengths, what you're good at, and then when it comes to your weaknesses, either minimize them or show how other things you have will compensate for that, or will kind of alleviate whatever concerns the client may have. And then again, when you're asked questions, always avoid giving a simple yes or no response with your answers. It's very uncomfortable when someone asks you a question on an interview and the interviewee just says yes or no and says nothing else. It's awkward. And it raises, again, red flags for the manager that maybe you're trying to hide something or you're not a good communicator. Always answer yes or no, and then give maybe a brief explanation of your answer, just to add some more color to it and to highlight, again, your strengths and how your strengths will help this particular client solve, or this particular company solve their problems. And again, obviously, don't ramble on and go on too long either, but you need to say something beyond just yes or no. So oftentimes when you're on an interview, you may be asked a question that you just don't know how to answer, or you may be asked a certain skill that you just don't have, or you don't have any experience with. And then the question comes up, well, what do I do in that situation? So if you're ever asked a question that you can't answer, it's always better to be honest. You do not want to lie or say you can do something that you can't, because what will happen is if you say, yeah, I can do that, then the manager may say, okay, well then tell me, how would you do this? They may ask you a follow-up question, and if you can't answer that follow-up question, then not only do you not have the skill, but you're also a liar. So that's two things against you instead of one. It's always better to be honest about what you can and what you can't do when you're on an interview. It's okay to admit you can't do something. People know that you're not perfect. No one's perfect. So if you're honest about what you can't do, that helps. But at the same time, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot. So if you can't answer the question, it helps if you can think about something that maybe is similar to what they asked that you can do, and then maybe explain that. Say, well, I don't know how to do this, but I work with this other tool that's very similar, and I think that because I've done this, I could very easily learn how to do this other thing. It helps if you can actually provide an example of a time where you maybe had to learn a new skill or had to learn something you didn't know how to do, and show that, I don't know this, but I know where to go to find this, and I know what to do to find this. I know what I need to do to learn this, and I am totally prepared to do that. That really helps overcome some of that negativity by not knowing the answer. Also, in general, it's a good idea if you answered a question. If you're not sure if you answered it correctly, you can ask the person, the interviewer, did I answer your question correctly, or did I give you what you were looking for, or is that information satisfactory? And that way, it gives you an opportunity to make a correction. If you might have thought you said the right thing, but maybe the manager wanted something a little bit different. By asking that question, you have an opportunity to correct your previous answer, or kind of help address any concerns that may be lingering. Okay, so we'll now here are some general kind of tips, things you should avoid and things you should do on interviews. So again, as I said before, you want to avoid simple yes or no answers. Try to give a little more detail when you answer questions, but then at the same time avoid long rambling answers or avoid going off on tangents. I've been in interviews where people just kind of start rambling, and it's very unpleasant, and it's a very big turnoff, and it can cost you a job. So avoid that. You also, at all times, want to avoid asking HR type questions. So on an interview with the manager, you should never ask about salary. You should never ask about vacation time. You should never ask about benefits. Those are very important questions that you need to have answered before you accept the job, but the time to ask that is when they want to make an offer to you. The time to ask that is not when you're doing an interview or initial interview with the manager. That, if you ask those questions, that it tells the manager that you really only care about what's in it for you, how the company's going to benefit you, or if you're asking about vacation time, then you're made to be sending a signal that you plan to take a lot of time off, which no one really is looking for when they're hiring someone. So save those questions for the HR person or for the offer negotiation. Try to avoid asking that during the main part of your interview. You also want to avoid saying disparaging things about your current or former employer. And that's for a few reasons. One, it's a small world, and you don't know who your manager, who this person who's interviewing you knows. You may say, oh yeah, my boss sucks, but this manager may be buddies with your boss. You don't know that, and if you say that, who knows? You could be opening up a world of pain for yourself. So avoid asking those types of disparaging questions. Avoid saying derogatory things about your former boss, and then same way, if you're trashing your old company, then your manager, this person who's interviewing them, may think that you're going to say the same thing about them, when you leave there, and it just puts a bad taste in everyone's mouth. So always stay positive, even if you hate your current job. Try to speak positively about it to the best of your ability. You also want to avoid asking what the job is that you're interviewing for. You should know what the job is if you did your preparation. You should know what the job is that you're interviewing for. And if you ask really, really basic, simple questions about what the job is, it shows that you don't know you didn't do any homework, you didn't put the time in to prepare, or that you're not listening and you're not paying attention. And you'd be amazed at how often that happens. People go into interviews and they just don't even know what job they're interviewing for. You need to avoid that, because if you're in that situation, you're not going to get the job. You need to show that you've done your homework and you understand what job you're actually interviewing for. Then at the same time, if you need clarification about something, then it is okay to ask for that clarification. That's fine. But just don't ask very basic, simple questions about what the job actually is. You should know that before you go into the interview. You also want to avoid asking questions that were already answered. So, if the manager told you, what software you're going to be using, you don't want to ask them later on, oh, what software tools do you guys use? Like, you should know that. And again, that comes back to the listening part of it. You need to be listening so that you avoid asking questions that were already answered. And when you're describing your previous work history, always talk about what you did, what your own accomplishments were. Use I and me. Don't say we, or don't describe what the team did. No one cares what your team did. They want to know what you did. And they're not hiring your team, they're hiring you. So they want to know what you did, what your accomplishments were, and what you could bring to the table. And then always on the interview, it's always a good idea to express interest and enthusiasm for the company. No one wants to hire someone that doesn't want the job, and no one wants to hire someone that doesn't want to work for that company. So, even if you're not 100% sold on the job, it's always better to show some interest and enthusiasm so that you don't eliminate the opportunity or the possibility of this job for yourself. It's always a good idea to show some interest, show some enthusiasm, show you want the job without being too desperate either. Find that nice middle ground. And two, again, preparation is the key to any interview. And if you've done your homework, it's a good idea to find ways to show that you've done your homework on the interview, so that you can come in with the types of questions you ask, or the way you answer your questions. If you can drop little hints showing that you kind of know a little bit more about what's happening, that helps. It shows that you've done your homework and you're the kind of person that's going to think through what they do and is going to put the time in to get the job done right. So now I want to touch for a moment about a certain type of question called behavioral questions. And if you're not familiar with behavioral questions, these are questions that they're basically more kind of open-ended questions. And the theory is that your past behavior could predict how you'll do in future similar situations. And a lot of companies, what they'll do, before they'll start an interview, they will meet with the team and they'll say, okay, well, what are the behaviors that would make a person a success in this job? Or what people that are doing this job now, what kind of behaviors are they exhibiting? And what do we want to see in people that we're hiring? So they'll decide, well, a good behavior for someone is someone that can learn skills quickly, or someone that can work independently, or someone that's very detail-oriented. They'll decide beforehand what are those key behaviors. And then they'll basically design questions that will be meant to present you with situations where you in the past had to exhibit those types of qualities, and then based on how you answer it and describe your past behavior, you will give clues to the interviewer in terms of how you'll behave in that situation. And then they kind of see if your past behavior kind of aligns with what they think an ideal behavior for this job is. So those are behavioral questions, and they're very popular, they're very common, and there's an excellent chance if you go on an interview you will be asked these types of questions. So it's important that you approach them with a plan in mind and a framework for dealing with them, and that's kind of where the STAR method comes in. So what is the STAR method? STAR stands for Situation, Task, Action, Result. So basically, STAR is a way for you to plan out how you're going to answer your question and the behavioral question in a systematic way so that you stay on target, you're focused, and you clearly show what you've done. And so the way that you would do that is, one, you start with the situation. So when we say situation, that's kind of giving an overview of the kind of painting a picture of what was happening that motivated your particular behavior. So let's say the behavioral question you're asked is, tell me about a time you had to learn a new skill quickly. So the situation for you may be, well, let's say you're a financial analyst and your company switched to a new accounting software or something, and so you could say, our situation was, we basically, our company, to save costs, they bought this new software package that had a new reporting module that, I had never seen or had any exposure to. And then the task is the specific goal that you were working towards in that particular situation. So in our example here, you could say your task was, I had to learn how to use this reporting module within 3 weeks so that I could generate a critical, year-end report that was needed by executives in the company. So your task was to learn how you to do that and how to use that reporting module. So the action then is the specific steps you took to achieve that goal. And again, you want to talk about what you did to achieve that goal, and you want to keep the focus on you and the specific details of what you did to achieve it. So try to avoid generic or fluffy things. You want to give specific, concrete examples of what you did to achieve that goal. So again, in our example here, you could say that your action was you discovered some online training courses in this tool. You, on your own in your free time, you took those courses, you learned it. You also found someone else, you found a networking group that uses this tool, and you attended a meetup for that group, and you learned some inside tips on how to most effectively use that reporting tool, and you were able to learn it by the end of the month. And then finally, the result is the specific outcome of that situation. So what happened? What was the end result? And again, don't be modest here. You want to really puff up, and really show that you made a huge difference for your company. So in this case, you can say, well, the result was I not only learned how to use the tool effectively, but I became my company's subject matter expert for this tool. And I actually was able to train other people in other departments on how to use it. And I became the go-to person for how to run reports using this specific tool. So that's kind of the result. So if you approach these behavioral questions using this framework, you will have a way to dive into the answer in a clear, succinct way that shows that you're an individual who could actually get things done, and hopefully that behavior that they're looking for will come through in your answer. And to help prepare for these behavioral questions, it's always a good idea before any interview to think about your own career and think about what are some of my major accomplishments. What are some projects I worked on that were really impressive, or something I did that really stands out, or maybe a time I had to deal with adversity, like a time I had to deal with a difficult manager, or a time I had to meet a very tight deadline, or a time I had to learn some kind of new crazy skill that I never had exposure to. Think about those times you had adversity or times you had major accomplishments before any interview, and be prepared to describe those details using the STAR method before the interview. And you may not be asked for those exact situations when you go in there, but if you have a few stories already keyed up in your mind, it really helps you to answer the question more effectively. Sometimes it can be intimidating if you're asked for a situation and you can't think of anything off the top of your head. So if you come in prepared with a few examples already of key accomplishments or key challenges you overcame, you have something to draw on rapidly when you go into the interview. And same thing, if you need a little time to come up with your answer, it's better to tell the manager, just give me a moment to think about this. That's totally okay, and I think that's better to take a moment to collect your thoughts before just diving in. So that if you just kind of run in with an answer and you haven't even thought through what you're going to say, you may get into trouble, or you may end up saying something you regret later, or something that's not really honest because you're just desperate to say anything. So it's better to take a moment to think about your answer before you start answering these behavioral type questions. So, lastly, at any interview, you're going to be asked what kinds, they're going to ask you, do you have any questions? And it's always a good idea to come into any interview with a few questions already keyed up that you can ask. The best questions to ask are questions that, one, show you've done your homework. So if you ask a specific question about, the industry, you say, well, how is the development of this new platform going to affect your company, or something like that, that shows that you know a little bit more than the average person about their company or about the industry. Those are great questions to ask. And then two, you want to ask questions that show that you're, a driven professional who is motivated to succeed. So questions about, how's my performance evaluated, or what kinds of, what do you think the ideal candidate would have for this job, or what's the most difficult challenge I'm going to face. Those questions show that you're goal-oriented, and you're motivated to learn what it takes to succeed. Those are the right kinds of questions to ask. So on any interview, you want to ask those types of questions. And again, avoid asking HR type questions about benefits. One time we actually had a candidate at Comrise that asked the manager what kind of severance packages they offer, which really is a terrible question to ask on a job interview. So don't ask any stupid questions like that when you're on an interview. Ask questions that show, one, you did your homework, and two, you're a professional who's driven to succeed. When the interview is wrapping up, it's always a good idea to express interest in the job. Again, let the manager know that you think this is a great job. You think you've got the skills needed to solve whatever problem they're having, and you're the right person for the job, and that you yourself are interested. If you're meeting someone face-to-face, it's a good idea to ask for a business card so that you have their email address if you want to send a thank you note. And it doesn't hurt, too, to ask what the next steps are. And that will give you some information and kind of set your mind at ease. So if you don't hear anything, within a week, if the manager said, yeah, we're meeting other people, we'll get back to you in 2 weeks, you kind of know what to expect, and you know when to follow up as well to get feedback. And then two, when you go home, it's always a good idea to kind of document what kinds of questions you were asked, and kind of just remember what you did and how you answered questions, so that you can learn for future interviews. If you think you were weak on one type of question, but remember that, write it down, and then when you go home, think about it, and maybe the next time you interview, you'll have a better answer prepared for those types of questions. So now I want to get into a few special types of situations you may encounter when you're doing interviews. And number one is the phone interview. It's definitely not unusual to start the interview process with an initial phone conversation. So I think you should approach a phone interview the same way you approach an on-site interview. You have to do your homework. You have to know the job. You have to know the company. You have to know the manager. You need to have your answers prepared. Just because it's a phone interview does not mean that you're not going to get grilled or you're not going to be asked difficult questions. You can be asked those same type of behavioral questions, those same type of standard interview questions. You may get those on the phone interview, so you still need to be prepared. But on the phone interview, you have the extra challenge of the connection. So you need to make sure that you've got a reliable phone and a good connection. And if at all possible, use a landline for your phone interview, number one. Even if you think you have a good cell phone signal, one, your phone's battery may die, something, the atmospheric conditions could be bad that day, and suddenly you've got a bad signal when you normally have a good one. Any kind of random thing could happen, so it's always better to use a landline if possible. Two, make sure you're doing your phone interview in a quiet place. Avoid doing it in a public area where there's background noise, or on a street where, a car horn could beep. Or even in your house, if you've got little kids running around, or a dog, you don't want to hear your dog barking in the background, or your kid, crying or something. So try to find a quiet place that you can go where you have a good connection to do your phone interview. And if you're forced to use your cell phone, obviously make sure that it's fully charged before you do your call. Now, when you're doing a phone interview, there's no face-to-face contact. So a lot of the kind of natural body language that you may have is not going to come through on the phone interview. And you can't make an impression with how you're dressed or how you shake hands. But you still need to make an impression. A phone interview, they're still trying to see if you're the kind of person they want to work with, or if they're still trying to see if you're a good cultural fit for a company. So you got to try to get your personality across with your voice as much as possible. And you should still remember to try to, speak positively and smile with your voice. That really helps. And sometimes doing a phone interview while you're standing up, that actually helps. For some reason, when you're standing, it helps you speak with a little bit more authority and more confidence than if you're sitting. So I recommend doing your phone interview while you're standing up, but don't pace around either. Just kind of stand, casually and do the phone interview. I think that helps make a good impression. Now, if you're in a situation where despite your best efforts, your phone connection is still bad, it's definitely better to ask the manager to reconnect than to go through with the interview and not being able to hear. I've done phone interviews where I have trouble hearing, and it's a major distraction, and it's a major turnoff, and it's a bad thing. You can cost yourself a job, even if you're a perfect candidate, if you've got a bad phone connection. Believe me, you definitely can. So it's always a good idea to, rather than go through with that, say, apologize, say, I think we have a bad connection, and ask to reconnect and call right back or reschedule for another time. It's better to do that than to go through with the phone interview where you've got a weak connection. And then, if you're on an interview and you miss a question or you have trouble hearing, it's always a good idea to ask a manager to repeat the question than to try to guess what they said and then answer wrong. It's always better to, if you're not sure what was asked, to just ask the manager to repeat. I mean, that's always a good idea to do that. If you misheard and you answer incorrectly, the manager may not realize you misheard, and they may just think you don't know what you're talking about or you're totally way off with your answer. And then two, when your phone interview is finishing up, it's a good idea to ask, again, about the next steps in the process, just the same way you would if you were doing a face-to-face interview. And also, again, just like a face-to-face interview, by all means, you can send a thank you note or do all the normal stuff you would do at the end of any kind of interview. And I think the key thing to understand is a phone interview is still an interview, and you still need to take it seriously. You still need to do your homework. You just have the extra added step of making sure you have a good, clear phone connection and that you're expressing yourself with your voice as much as possible. So now I want to talk a little bit about video interviews. I'd say video interviews are sort of a mix between the phone interview and the face-to-face interview. You have some of the same connection challenges that you'll have on a phone interview, but the difference is you can actually be seen, whereas a phone interview obviously is just your voice. So I would approach a video interview, number one, on the technical side. So make sure that you've got the software you need downloaded, make sure your webcam is actually working, make sure your audio is turned on or supported on your device. And make sure your webcam is on a stable area. Make sure it's on a stable desk or stable table. You don't want to, be using your camera phone and be, have it shaking and wobbling. That's a huge distraction. So make sure you've got it a stable webcam that works, and you have the right software that you need to do the video interview. Make sure you find, again, a quiet place to do it. All the same concerns about background noise that you have on a phone interview, that still applies to video interviews. So make sure, again, it's quiet. And you also want to pay attention to the backdrop. I would avoid doing it, behind a picture or behind a window or something that's going to be distracting. Maybe just find a plain wall, a white wall or a solid color wall that's not distracting, and just kind of sit behind that wall. I think that's the safest thing to do. And definitely test. For a video interview, you can test out your webcam beforehand. See how the lighting is, see how the audio sounds. Do your preparation before the interview rather than during the interview. Now, on the interview, because you're visible, your body language matters again. One, you need to make sure you're dressed professionally, and I would dress almost the same way you would dress for a face-to-face interview. I think it's the same setup. You want to make sure you're creating a professional image on the screen for the manager. Make sure you're sitting up straight. Maintain eye contact, and the way you maintain eye contact is by looking into the camera directly. You don't stare up at the ceiling or at the wall. Look into the camera when you're doing your video interview. And again, just the way you would on a face-to-face interview, you want to make sure you're expressing yourself in a confident but not arrogant way, that you're that you're relaxed, that you know what you're doing, but you're not overly casual either. You want to kind of find that balance of confidence and casualness that would really help you show that, again, you're the kind of person that this manager wants to work with day in and day out. And then, of course, you want to practice. Sometimes it's a little awkward when you see yourself on camera when you do a video interview. So it's a good idea to maybe record yourself doing a video and watch it a few times and kind of see how you come across, and then think about how you could adjust the video to better express yourself, or to kind of avoid problems, or fix the lighting, or whatever problem that you may be having during your video interview. And that little extra work you put in to prep and make sure that it's working correctly and that the software is right and that you look good, that helps. It really makes a big difference, and it makes the video interview much smoother. So our last topic, I want to talk about our video cover letters. So if you're not familiar with a video cover letter, this is basically kind of a new trend, and it's becoming more and more popular with a lot of companies. When you're applying for a job, you may actually be asked to create a video using usually the software that the company has, or maybe your phone's video software, to kind of give like a summary of yourself and why you're a good fit for the company, or why you're a good fit for the job. Just to kind of add some color to your application. And a lot of people are intimidated by this because it's very open-ended, and you don't know what to say, you don't know how to come across, so we thought it would be helpful to provide some kind of tips for you in terms of how to approach these video cover letters, because they're becoming more popular. And if you haven't seen this before, there's a good chance you will encounter this in your future job searches. And I think the number one rule of thumb to keep in mind when you're creating a video cover letter is to basically keep it concise and get to the point. The average person gets distracted after about 30 seconds of watching a video, so you need to be able to capture their interest and attention in that first 30 seconds, and try not to make the video too long. No one wants to sit through a 5-minute video of somebody going on and on and on about their life and their history and their work experience. You'll get to that when you get to the interview. The point of the video cover letter is just to kind of give a flavor of who you are as a person and intrigue the manager enough that they want to call you in for that next step. So the best thing to do is kind of keep a short, straight to the point message. Ideally around a minute or so, I think, is kind of the ideal length for these video cover letters. So before you start recording, you want to have a plan. So you need to think about, what are the points you want to touch on about yourself? What do you want to really say when you do this video? And I would avoid writing a script. You want to kind of be more natural than that, but it is important to know what topics you want to touch on when you do the recording. And I think it's best to find a mix of your professional experience, your educational background, and a mix of a little personal stuff to add some flavor. So if you talk about a hobby, or what motivated you to get into your field and your life, I think those little personal touches make the video a lot more interesting for the person watching it than just kind of reading your resume. Basically, that's kind of boring. So you want to think about what your key points are before you start filming. You also want to think about what your audience here is. So, I think a good strategy for a job seeker to do is to make kind of a generic cover letter and put it on your social media. So you could put one on your LinkedIn page or your Facebook page or whatever it is. Put a copy, a little video, just kind of showing who you are and what you're looking for and what your background is. And for that kind of social media version, it should be pretty generic, because you don't know what kind of job you may apply to, so you want to keep it more open-ended. But if you're creating a video cover letter for a specific job, then you do need to kind of tailor your message towards that job. So when you're talking about who you are and what you've done, you want to, again, always think about what problem this job is solving and how your experience relates to that problem and how you're going to solve that problem for the company. You also want to try to think about your message and how you express yourself, just the way you do on any interview. You want to be confident without being arrogant, and you want to show that you've got passion for what your field is. And that passion, these cover letters are a great way to show that passion. If you're enthusiastic, if you show you really like what you're doing, and you're motivated both personally and professionally in your field, that passion will come through, and it really makes it more likely that the person's going to want to call you in for the face-to-face interview. So you want to be passionate and try to think of something original about yourself that might stand out from other people, some original thing that you've done or some original experience you've had that most people haven't had that makes you kind of uniquely qualified for a job. And then, because with these cover letters, you often have the opportunity to do multiple takes. Take advantage of that and do multiple takes until you get a version that's fluent, where you're not stuttering, where there's no awkward pauses. That's kind of the image you want to set out to other people. And try to use vocabulary that you would on any interview. So still keep your language professional, Don't say, try to avoid making inappropriate jokes or things that are kind of off color. Treat it as if you're talking to someone on an interview when you're doing these videos. And lastly, you want to think about your closing message. The last impression you make matters on these cover letters. So, when you sign off on the video, you want to, again, make some kind of a statement that shows you're really passionate about the role and that you're personally committed to the company or to your field, and that you have some kind of unique skill, unique trait that really makes you the right person for a company or a job. So now, I'd just like to show you all just an example of what I thought was a pretty effective video cover letter, so you can kind of see that.
Hi, my name is Haley Roberts, and I am a current student at Central Michigan University, majoring in apparel merchandising. My interest in fashion started at a young age when my mother couldn't get her 4-year-old daughter to leave the mall at closing time. Hi, my name is Haley Roberts, and I am a current student at Central Michigan University, majoring in apparel merchandising. My interest in fashion started at a young age when my mother couldn't get her 4-year-old daughter to leave the mall at closing time. When I came to college, my career path was obvious: apparel merchandising. My classes here at CMU have prepared me for a vast amount of career opportunities, including visual merchandising, computer-aided design through Adobe Suite and Toledo, apparel advertising and promotion, and much more. My work experience through retail and receptionist work have taught me customer service skills and interpersonal skills. And though not related to fashion, my leadership experiences through my sorority, Alpha Chi Omega, have given me a profound amount of personal growth and work ethic that I can apply anywhere in my life. I'm a hard worker, intelligent, reliable, enthusiastic, motivated, and excited to be applying for your company.
So I like that video because I like the little personal touch you put in the beginning, and I think she did a good job of kind of capturing your interest right from the start. And I think she had a pretty good energy. She seemed genuinely enthusiastic about what she was doing and the kinds of careers that she was pursuing. And it was also pretty short. I've seen cover letters that are much longer and a lot more boring, so I feel like this one was straight to the point and didn't go on for too long and gave you just the right amount of information to see what her background is, what she can bring to the table, and it seems like somebody you would want to move forward with for an interview. So I thought that was a great example of a video cover letter. So that really concludes the main part of our webinar. I just want to point out that we have created a handout for all of you that you can download. If you look in your GoToWebinar screen, there should be in the handout section a little Word document that you can download called Night Before the Interview Checklist. This is something that we prepared for you guys that you can all use. I think it's a great checklist that you can fill in before any interview with some information that you can write in about where you're going, who you're meeting with, just to kind of help you stay organized. And it has a list of all the common, not all, but a lot of common interview questions that are standard for most job interviews. So you can think about for that job, how you're going to answer each of those questions. So it's a good kind of homework assignment for you to do before an interview to figure out the answers to all those questions. So you have that already in your back pocket when you go into the interview. It also has a handy checklist of things that you can should do before the night of the interview, like make sure you lay out your clothes before the interview, or make sure you know where you're going, those types of things. So it kind of helps you stay organized. So please, by all means, download that from our webinar, and please do use it. So we'd like to open it up to questions now. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type them into the chat, and I will be happy to answer them. So one question here is, what are some ways to capture an interviewer within the first few minutes? So we kind of touched on this, but the key is making a good first impression. So You want to make sure, again, that you're dressed professionally, that you're polite and positive, you're making good eye contact. And again, if you can try to find that commonality between you and the interviewer, I think that goes a long way to kind of breaking the ice and making a good first impression. If you show that you've done your homework beforehand, and you kind of show that or let that out, it kind of puts people at ease. And again, people like to hire people that remind them of themselves, and they won't, no one will do that consciously, but it's kind of a subconscious bias that many people have. So you want to, again, try to see what that person's all about and think about how you can relate to that individual. All right. And someone asked, what are the main things to think about when you're pay attention to regarding in-person interviews versus video interviews? And I think they're actually kind of similar. I think you need to kind of take a similar approach to video interviews and in-person interviews. So I'd say just because it's a video interview, you don't want to think about it as being a phone interview. I'm sorry, you don't want to think about it as being different from an in-person interview. You want to do the same preparation, make the same eye contact, have the same energy, and really approach it the same way. And you want to pay attention to the technical aspects of the video interview. That's the main difference. But beyond that, it's really pretty similar. Just pay attention to your body language and how you're answering questions. Okay, now someone asked if it's okay, I guess the tips for phone interviews, and if it's okay to give personal examples for behavioral questions rather than work examples. For phone interviews, again, I would say make sure you're in a quiet place, make sure you have a good phone signal connection, and make sure you're paying attention to the tone of your voice. That's really the best advice I can give you. Other than that, just treat it like a face-to-face interview with the same preparation and the same techniques. Now, regarding behavioral questions, I would say if at all possible, you should give a work experience answer. Avoid giving a personal answer because you may end up revealing stuff about your life that you don't want to reveal. Like you don't want to get into topics of your family, how many kids you have, whether you're married, your age. That's not appropriate for an interview, and you could open yourself up to biases and things that are not necessary. So I would avoid that, with the exception being if you're entry level, if you're a college student, and you don't have a lot of work experience. Then in that case, then you can maybe talk about your volunteer experience or classes you took or a product you worked on at school. Those are all totally valid things to talk about when you're doing your interview. And someone asked again for kind of like an outline for video cover letters or how long they should be. I think a video cover letter, to me, the ideal length is about a minute. Anything over a minute, I get bored personally. So I would try to keep it to a minute. I mean, if you need a little bit more time to go into details beyond that, by all means, do that. But just make sure you're keeping it interesting and try to be engaging the whole time. If you're entry level, you need to again, focus on the experience you do have and talk a lot more about your educational background. Just kind of like that girl did in the video. She talked about her sorority, what she did there. That's totally valid. If you're in a fraternity or sorority and you were involved in leading that organization, that's great experience. You can definitely mention that. You want to talk about your classes, the classes you took, some special projects you worked on, maybe how you interacted with a difficult professor or something like that. All that stuff is totally valid. And if you're on an entry-level interview, the manager knows you're entry-level, and they're going to expect those types of answers. So by all means, in that situation, please do talk about that type of experience. And now, someone asked asking about salary frowned upon. If you ask about salary in an interview with a manager, one, the manager may not even know all the time. A lot of times the salary is actually decided by HR and by different guidelines they have to follow. So they may not know, and it could kind of put them in an uncomfortable situation. And two, you may end up getting into a negotiation too early. You may sell yourself short. You may ask for something less than the job can really pay. It's not the right time to ask. And two, it could be a turnoff. If if you start coming in there asking about money, it shows that your main motivation is money, and you don't really care about the job, or you don't really care about what you bring to the table. That could be a red flag for a lot of managers. So I would, well, you definitely need to know that. An interview is a two-way street. The job hiring is a two-way street. It has to be beneficial to both parties. There's a time and place for it, and the time and place is not during your main interview with a manager. It's you can ask that either if you're dealing with a third-party recruiter, then you can ask that person, or if you're at the final stages, you get an offer, you can talk to the HR person about that as well. And yeah, and again, someone asked about not wanting to waste time. If the salary's not a fit, I agree with you. If the salary is way off, then you are wasting your time. But ideally, when anytime you go for a job, there's always an initial call from someone. It's never just you're never going to go right into the body of the main interview. So, ideally, if you're working with a third-party recruiter, ask that person. Don't let them submit you if you don't know anything about what the job is paying, and you need to have some understanding. And believe me, the recruiter will want to know too. They don't want to waste their time if your salary requirements are way off. So, have that conversation beforehand and make sure you understand what the job is paying. If you're dealing with like a corporate recruiter, then you can certainly ask them too. Especially if you didn't apply for the job, if they cold called you, then yeah, you can definitely ask them about that. But the main point here is when you're in that main interview, before the company has decided if they want to hire you, that's the time to avoid asking those HR questions. That's not the right place for it. All right. Okay. Someone asked if you're currently in a contract position, or if you're interviewing for a permanent position. How do you answer the question of why are you leaving your current job without being blunt about it? I think that's kind of a unique situation. If you're a consultant and you're interviewing for a permanent position, it is right off the bat, the manager is going to be concerned that you're a job hopper, that you're not going to stay there for a long time. So you want to think about how you're going to, I guess, solve those concerns. So you want to think about, how you're going to reassure them that you're not looking for a 6-month gig and you're going to be out the door after that. And the way you address that is by answering that question. So if they ask why you're looking for a job, you could say, I'm sick of the consulting life. I don't like changing jobs every 6 months. I'm looking for a place that I can grow and develop and be a part of the team, and I can settle in. I can be a part of that organization for the time to come. I'm tired of just being an outsider. I want to really be at the table where the main decisions are made, and that's how you answer it. And you can be honest. You say, my current contract is ending in a month or 2 months, so that's why I'm looking for a job. But again, I'm tired of doing this consulting stuff. I really want to get back into a perm type of role. I think that's more than enough to say something like that. So someone asked, if you've been with a company for 20 years, how do you convince someone that you're right for the job? And I agree with you that that's a challenge. If you've been with one company for a long time, it does put you at a disadvantage, because sometimes people will assume that your skills are stagnant, or you're kind of you're an expert in the company, you're not an expert in your field. I would just advise you in that situation to knowing that going in, knowing that you have this disadvantage, you want to think about ways to mitigate that before you go into the interview. And ways you mitigate that are, one, you can think about, you can show this person that yes, I've been with this company for 20 years, but I keep up with my industry. So I'm a member of, trade groups, or I go to regular training seminars, or I'm using the latest software. Or if you're not using the latest software, you're aware of what the latest software is, and you've taken steps to learn it, or whatever it is. Show that you're up to date and you're current in your field. You know, and you can also use it to your advantage. I mean, you can show, hopefully, if you've been with one company for that long, hopefully you've been advancing through those years and not been in that same job for 20 years. So you can show that you've had a history of excelling in your field and moving to different roles. And even though you've been with one company for 20 years, you haven't done the same job for 20 years. You've been in different departments. You've learned new things along the way, and you've grown as a professional. And I think if you explain that in a convincing way, I think that will kind of calm the manager down, or at least kind of overcome some of those concerns. So someone asked, they said they tend to ramble sometimes. Is there body language that you can look for, when to tell that they're getting bored? Yeah, I would say just kind of pay attention to their eyes. If they their eyes start to drift around the room, or they start looking at their watch, or they sometimes they may sigh suddenly, go like, oh, something like that, or make some kind of comment, or not, like simply not paying attention. That's usually a sign that they're bored. So if you kind of sense that kind of shiftiness or uncomfortableness, that's usually a clue that you're kind of rambling too long. So someone said they went to an interview where they were handed a situational statement and given 45 minutes to develop a plan and a solution. Any advice for that? That's a tough one. If you're given like that kind of a task at any interview where you're asked to like solve a problem, that's always kind of a challenge. And a lot of times they're looking to see how you think and how you approach a novel problem that you maybe haven't encountered before. So I'd say it's situational. Depends on what the question is, obviously, but just try to answer it to the best of your ability. And you want to show your thought process along the way. So even if you don't maybe give the exact answer they want or the exact solution they want, you want to show how you came to that solution and how you were able to kind of solve that. They want to know your thought pattern so that you can show that you'll bring that same problem-solving approach to this company's challenges. That's probably the best you can do. Someone asked about ageism. If you do have a good phone interview and then you kind of see when you get to the face-to-face interview that they kind of maybe are disappointed at your age. It's very unfortunate, but that does happen, sadly. I'd be lying if I said it didn't, and it's not right, and it's illegal, in fact, to do that, but people have unconscious biases sometimes, and so the best advice I can give you is to think about your interview preparation and do your homework, and you have to show them that your age doesn't matter. You're just as qualified as anybody else. You're again similar to that person that was at a company for 20 years. It's a similar kind of a problem. So you want to show that, yeah, maybe you've been around, you're more experienced, but you're still up on the latest technologies. You're still advancing and developing and growing as a professional. You haven't peaked. You haven't reached your limit. You still want challenges. You still want to grow. You have all the same attributes as somebody that is maybe 20 years younger. And better than that, you know more. You've seen all these different experiences, and you can bring that experience to the table and solve the problem. And all you can do really is just kind of steer the conversation on the right course and stick to your fundamentals and use every opportunity you have to reassure them of those things without going overboard. Obviously, you don't want to come across as desperate and shifty and like you're worried about it. But you want to kind of naturally introduce these ideas, as you answer your questions, that you're current, you're energetic, you're motivated, and you have all the same attributes as someone younger, but you have that extra added experience that a younger person may not have. All right. Someone asks, how do you handle interviews? How do you approach an interview with like a VP or director level, or someone who's at a higher level? I'd say it's a little bit when you're meeting with someone at a high executive level, I would still approach it the way you would any other interview, and you still do research on that person. And the advantage, if they're an executive, there's more information about them. A lot of times companies will have a profile of that person on their website, or they might have a stronger LinkedIn presence, or there could be news articles about them. do that homework, and I kind of use the same strategy you use on any other interview. Usually, by the time you get to that level, they've already kind of made a decision, and it's more like the VP or executive has to just kind of bless that decision. So when you get to that stage, it's almost like it's your job to lose versus you have to convince them to hire you. So I would be a little bit more defensive in those interviews. Like, don't say anything crazy. Don't go over the top. Just try not to say anything that would make them think you're not qualified or you don't have the right experience, and don't try to avoid offending this person in any way. Try to just kind of keep it cool. Don't ask, again, those stupid HR questions, or don't ask ridiculous questions that you should know already. But other than that, you got to stick to the same fundamentals as any other interview. All right, I know there's some more questions. We've kind of exceeded our limit by a bit, so we'll look through the questions and we'll try to maybe privately answer those questions if we could after the seminar. But we do want to thank all of you for joining this presentation and for asking really good questions too. If you have any additional questions, or if we didn't get to your specific question, please feel free to send us an email to webinars@comrise.com, and we'll try to answer your question if we could. You can also send your resume to us, and we'll be happy to take a look. You can also, if you're interested in working with Comrise, you can go to our website, comrise.com, and you can see all of our job openings there. And please feel free to apply. We'd be happy to work with you. And once again, thank you all very much for your time.